So, welcome to the beginning of Grasshopper 101. So today we'll be learning the day will be split into kind of four categories, right? And we'll be working on two little test projects. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Grasshopper interface. Some of you may be new to the Grasshopper canvas and how to look things up and how to find things. So we'll cover that. The second part will break down a incredibly simple problem just to get you guys thinking about how to think computationally and developing logic. We'll then be trying to explain what lists are in Grasshopper. Stay tuned for that because we will be using emojis and food, which is trying to explain it as clear as we can. And the last one, we will be rebuilding. We will be building our basic Grasshopper 101 tower, which is based on Big's Cocoa Towers in Miami. I think we did have someone from Miami. I saw that was posted. So yeah, maybe they're in the building. Who knows? Okay, so the Grasshopper interface. So this is what the Grasshopper interface is. And at this point in the presentation, I'm going to kind of be bouncing between Rhino and the presentation and Rhino and Grasshopper. So this is Rhino, okay? Just to be clear, this may look a little bit different from your Rhino. That's simply because I have my Rhino set in this dark mode, right? It's no different from your Rhino. It's literally just my own preference for how I use Rhino. If you want to open Grasshopper, Grasshopper now comes installed with, I think it was Rhino 5, Rhino 6, and Rhino 7. And to access it, you can do it two ways. You can simply type in the words Grasshopper and press enter, or you can hit this little launch Grasshopper button on the toolbar here. I'm going to use and press enter, and we are now in Grasshopper. So as you can see, it's a floating window with Rhino, right? Of course, this is why it is handy to have two screens when you're using Grasshopper, but otherwise you can use it by just like putting it on the side and things like that. But you are, your Grasshopper window is connected to your current instance of Rhino. So if we look at the interface, basically this is the Grasshopper canvas. It's an infinite canvas that can just keep going. You can place components anywhere on your canvas. There is a little quick toolbar here to access, any scripts that you have in the past. As you can see, we've been working on the Cocoa Tower one for you guys. Otherwise, the next thing we have, if we go on our little presentation, oh, wrong one. We'll go through the toolbar and all the components. So for you guys, my Grasshopper may look a little bit different, right? It's a little bit extreme in that I have all these other plugins. So this is the toolbar where all our components live. And you guys will have at least up to here. I think it's the display. I can't think of any other ones. Yeah, up to here. And these are the core Grasshopper components, and we'll be just using these today. We'll be using just basic Grasshopper components. The only other one that I would recommend and highly use is Elephant. That's one I use quite a lot, and maybe we will use it in the 103, but otherwise we should be good today. I'm not going to go through each component, like I said, because there are a lot of them. In fact, this is the part of the presentation where I illustrate that by showing you guys these are all the components. These are the base Grasshopper base components that come with Grasshopper. So as you can see, there are quite a lot of them. So I'm not going to sit here and try and explain how each one of them works, but I do want to kind of illustrate how many of them are. I will go over, however, just the categories, right? So you can see we have parameters, math, sets, vector, all the way to display. So just loosely, I'll explain. Parameters, for example, is where you start a lot of your scripts, right? These are kind of quite basic components. For example, the number slider is here, right? These little black hexagonal components are usually components that allow you to bring geometry from Rhino into Revit. So, like a BREP, for example, is something that I could right click on, set one BREP, and I'll go into my Rhino space and actually select one. We'll be doing that a little bit later on. We've got maths. Like, these things should be fairly familiar. Think of high school maths. You got your addition, division, negative, multiplication, greater than, smaller than, domains. You've also got your, Grasshopper Python scripting and things like that. Trigonometry. We all love a bit of trigonometry. Sets. This is where the world of lists live. Sequences, sets. I understand that some of these things may not make sense to you, but I'm just kind of laying it out there. We got text and trees. This is where data tree stuff lives. Vectors. So this is where we can create everything to do with vectors, which are like grids, fields, planes, points, vectors. This is where all that kind of stuff live. Curves, obviously, that we're often working with curves in Rhino. This is the world of NURBS. So here we can analyze curves, we can divide, we can create curves, we can create splines and NURBS curves and things like that. We can explode them, flip them, and offset curves, right? Everything to do with curves lives there. Similar story with surfaces. We can analyze surfaces, we can create surfaces, we can also create solids and boxes and things like that. Utilities for surfaces, dividing surfaces, things like that. Meshes, again, a similar story: analyze, create, and utilize meshes. Intersections, this is where we can create an intersection between a BREP and a plane, a mesh and a plane, a curve and a plane, or a curve and a curve, and a surface and a surface, right? This is where everything's to do with intersections, solid intersections. Transformations, these should be fairly familiar to you, like mirror, move, rotate, array, scale, project, morphing things. So these are all the kind of transformations. And finally, display. This is things to do with, creating colors, dimensions, previewing vectors and geometry. So I'll just go over the kind of basic ideas of some of these components and how they work. Obviously, we're going to get into this further during the course. I'll try and zoom in as I'm doing stuff, because I'm seeing, like, on YouTube, you guys can clearly see this stuff. If we go back to our presentation, the next thing is visibility. So there are various different ways to view things in Grasshopper. So in order to do this, and by the way, you're encouraged and assume that you guys will be following along here. But obviously at this part, it's kind of a view, and if you feel like following along, you can do. But we do have practical things that we hope you guys will follow along with. So, for example, I'm just going to make a sphere on the canvas, and I chose this particular component because I know it already comes, like, with some basic inputs, right? So this is a 1 meter sphere. By the way, I will probably be working in meters during this, just to keep it simple in terms of numbers, not millimeters. And I'm guessing most of the world, apart from the Americans on the call, work in millimeters/meters. So this is a simple sphere. You can drop this onto your canvas. If you zoom into the origin of your Rhino, you'll be able to view it. And so this is the basic Grasshopper viewing. So this object does not exist in Grasshopper. I cannot select it, right? I'm just previewing the geometry from Grasshopper into Rhino. And this preview is defined by these little settings on the top right-hand side here, right? So this is the default setting. And you'll see on the left-hand side of that, you have various different settings. We could do a wireframe, or you could just turn off the preview entirely. Obviously, the wireframe for a sphere is literally just the starting profile before it looks like it's getting revolved around it, right? So in this case, we can do, we'll stick it with shaded. The green guy is one that I use quite a lot, and this is called draw only draw preview geometry for selected objects, right? So sometimes when you have a script and you have all these different things going on, it gets a little bit confusing to see everything. If you hit this guy, you'll notice the preview goes. It only shows you the thing that you have selected, which can be useful when you have a script and you want to go through step by step what each thing is doing. This is quite a useful thing to use. I will be using it today, so keep an eye on when that is being used. But that is a good one to use. This one is basically where you can save the preview. You can change the color from red to yellow. You can change those preview colors if you fancy a different kind of style. Otherwise, you can also choose a different level of quality. You can say low quality. I'd recommend to keep at that level. You will see, I don't think you can maybe just make out that this is ever so slightly faceted. If I was to bump up the quality to high, it would be like a much smoother surface. You often, I never really change this unless it's something really specific. So those are a little bit about the view settings, what these guys are up here. Next up, we have all our view settings. We have our quick access. We've looked at that. A few things with the display settings at the top here. So in the same way you can access your view settings here, you can also access them under display here. So it's kind of two ways to access the same thing. The main thing I want to show you guys here is the way that you display your icons. So I'm going to zoom in again here. I'm also just going to put on the canvas a few other components. Point, let's can't think of any other ones. Mirror, just a few components really. So you'll see the default setting for Grasshopper is simply this, like a little bit of text and a letter that gives you a bit of a clue of what the component actually needs as inputs, right? If you go to display, you'll see there's draw icons and draw full names. If I go to draw icons, you'll see that the text is gone and you get a little icon instead of a piece of text. And the icon kind of describes what this component does. So you can see mirror, there's a little like sort of mirror icon going on there. Sphere looks like a sphere, and move is kind of like an arrow from one point to another. Another one that is useful, particularly when you're starting out with Grasshopper, is called draw full names. And so this extends the input to a full name, so it's a little more descriptive. So you can see now B stands for base, which is the base point the sphere will start from, and R stands for radius. So this way it's a little clearer. I would recommend using these as you're starting out with Grasshopper. If you're already a little more comfortable of it, it's a little bit annoying because it makes your components even bigger than they are. One other thing is I'll use is this little glasses called bifocals. This guy allows you guys to see what the actual component name is called. If you're missing a component and you type in what this guy says, it will find it for you in the search function. Of course, I should also mention the search function itself. Instead of like going through all the components through the little icons here, the most common way to do that in Grasshopper is to simply double click on the canvas, and then you type in a description of the thing you're looking for. So again, if I type in move, you'll see I've got a whole bunch of components. Don't panic if you don't see the same list that I do. That is, again, because I have a whole bunch of plugins installed. But here it is quite good in terms of like how it searches for things, and I can find the one that I think is correct. You'll see this as we go through the course today. The other thing I will show here is under display, you can choose different preview settings. I don't really think these are critical, but like you can choose the way you view a point in Rhino and Grasshopper. So like maybe if I just make a point I'll kind of do this in reverse order. So I'm going to make a point. So this is also a good example. I made a point in Rhino. How do I bring it into Grasshopper? I get one of these primitive point components, which you'll see is just empty. And if I right click on it, I can set one point and I can actually go and select the point. Now the point is brought into our Grasshopper canvas and we can use it for our script. But you can see here the point is represented by a cross. If I go to display settings, I can change that to a circle or a dot and things like that. Honestly, I don't think I've ever changed these settings, but if you want to know how to do it, it's there. One thing, just two other things I want to make sure. Always make sure draw fancy wires is on. I'll explain what that is a little bit later. The second thing is, depending on the units that you're working on, your preview plane size is important. So I'm working in meters, right? My preview plane size is 50, which means this plane here should be 50 meters, right? If I draw a rectangle that's roughly 50 by 50, you can see it's about the same size as my plane size, right? So if I was working in millimeters and my plane size was 1, my millimeter would be my plane would be absolutely tiny, and it would be kind of hard to see where it is, right? So that's another one. Just make sure your preview plane size matches the units that you're actually using. The rest I'll kind of I won't go into because they're a little more complicated. We'll touch on that in the next class. Next up, what have we got? We got a few of our stuff that we've already gone through. We've gone through double clicking and searching. Of course, how do you actually connect things? This is important. So we have a point, right, that I brought onto our canvas. We have our sphere. By default, the sphere will use the zero of our Rhino workspace. If I want it to use the point, which is over here, I can connect that to its base. And the way that we connect that is through these little bubbles here. If you click on the bubble, you get this little wire that comes out. It kind of looks like a snake here. And you just simply hold down the mouse button, your left mouse button, and put it into another input of one of your components. And you'll see now my sphere has moved from the origin to this new point, right? So that's how we connect things in Grasshopper. If you want to disconnect things, I no longer want this to be joined. I can right click on it and hit disconnect this input, right? So connecting is easier. I just drag and connect it to from one component to another. To disconnect it, I can right click disconnect and the input. One other way you can do it is by hitting Control on the keyboard. You'll see when I hover over it, it's a red arrow that says minus. If I go it the other way, it disconnects. So connect is just to drag it off, disconnect, hold down Control, and you'll disconnect it. We'll keep going. Let's talk about the components themselves. Like this is obviously a key thing. Let's look at the move component, right? So each component, first of all, let's go back to my little diagram. As you can see here, the components, most components have the same setup. You have input parameters, you have its core function, and you have its output, right? The output of the component. If we go into Grasshopper, this component is broken down into 3 little areas, right? So it is different if I hover over the middle of the component compared to the input of the component, right? I might go back to, I'm going to get rid of icons because I find it a bit distracting. So this is a bit clearer in terms of like the different ways of looking at the components. So here, first of all, I have my inputs. I can kind of read what they are: geometry, motion. If you hover over inputs, it gives you a little bit of a description of what these things are. So it's asking me for some kind of geometry, right? That's a fairly open thing. Motion is slightly different. It's given me the icon of a vector, and it says a translation vector. So it's giving me clues on what it's asking. You can also right click on inputs and you get various different modifiers. We'll cover that tomorrow. And you can also directly input things by setting a geometry and things like that. I won't quite get into that. So you have your inputs, you have your core functionality. If you hover over that, it explains what this component does. This is the move component. It translates an object along a vector. If you right click on it and go to help, it does give you a slightly more, a few more clues of what this component does. Some components give you more descriptions, others it's fairly basic. And then you have the output. So obviously, let's say I input my sphere and move it in a certain direction, the output is going to be that moved sphere. And you can see right now, if I hover over it, it says null. I can also right click on these things and access these modifiers. So each component gives you a bit of information about what the component does, its inputs, and its outputs, right? Which is super important. There are different kind of, you'll see that the components are kind of colored differently. So most components are in a light gray. That's good news. That it looks like your component is working correctly. The dark gray component, which I'll illustrate in a little bit in Grasshopper, is when the preview is turned off. A completely grayed out component means that the component is frozen. It's not working. It's been turned off. Again, I'll show you that in a minute. And some components come with warnings. So if a component turns orange, it means there's some kind of problem with it. It's giving you a warning. It's working, but it's working with morning. Morning warnings. If it's red, it means there are errors, and red is typically not a good sign. So if you ever see red components, you really want to look at what they're doing. And green components is when you have it selected. So to illustrate these things, I'll do it with the sphere component. So this is my sphere component. It's working perfectly, hence why it is gray. You'll also see there's a preview in the background. If I right click on this guy and I get rid of this little head preview thing, you'll see the preview is turned off. I will no longer see that preview in my Rhino space, right? This is because some components you don't want to see the preview, and it's gone to that grayed out component. If I look at the other component, it's a slightly light gray as opposed to a dark gray color. If I want to completely turn this component off, I can again right click on it and hit this enabled button. And this turns the component off. It's not doing anything. It's literally like freezing the component. You can't see it because it's not working. So if you ever see a component like this, that is because it has been frozen. In fact, I'll make a copy of that. So now this one, we'll look at all three. This has the sphere and preview is on. This is the sphere with no preview, and this is it completely off. There are other components. Find brep closest point. This component comes in straight away orange because this component will not work unless it has the correct inputs. And so whenever you get a warning, you get this little bubble here. And this bubble is giving you some clues as to why the thing is not working. It's saying input parameter point failed to collect data, input parameter brep failed to collect data. It's not super clear, but it's telling you that it's missing a point and it's missing a brep, and it needs both of those things for it to work. The only other, I think, if we try I'm just trying to think of one. I can't make it go red. Don't know if, yeah, otherwise I can't think of a component I can make go red. If I put point into the brep, that might, oh, there you go. if I put a point into a brep, this means it is completely not working. There are inputs, but it's not working, and it's giving me a bit of a clue. Data conversion failed from point to brep. Again, it's not super clear, but it's giving you clues in a kind of computer speak of why it is not working. So it's kind of like telling you you've inputted a point, not a brep. So that's not cool. Give me a brep. So that's a little bit about what the colors of the components mean. I think the main thing to take away from this is keep an eye on orange and red components and read what the component is doing and check the output for it. I think we've gone over some of these already. And finally, the last one I'll show you guys. We will also do some things tomorrow tomorrow afternoon when we cover tips and tricks. We'll continue on some of these things. The other thing that you'll see is like if you hit the middle mouse button on your mouse, if you press your little wheel on your mouse, you get this little display settings. There's a few things here that are really really useful. First of all, you may see similar components to what we had before, or little icons had before. If you hit the middle mouse button on the canvas, you're basically controlling the canvas. If you hit the middle mouse button on a component, you're actually accessing things inside the component, like that same preview or unpreview thing. You can turn off and turn on the component. The other thing you can do is find things. So let's say I'm zoomed out and my sphere is over there. If I hit the middle mouse button and use this zoom command, it will actually zoom in. You'll see in the background, it's zoomed in on, it's centered basically my sphere, right? So in case you want to find something. The other super critical thing, which I should explain, which can be accessed both by right-clicking on the component and also hitting the middle mouse button on your component, is the little fried egg. This is called baking. And if you've ever heard anyone using Grasshopper, you'll hear them say, hey, have you baked it into Rhino, or baking this, baking that? We're not into cooking and secretly bake croissants and stuff on the side. We are baking the geometry from Grasshopper into Rhino. So, like I said, this geometry does not exist in Rhino, but at some point I may want it to be in Rhino, and that's where I bake it. I would recommend right-clicking on the component, and then you can hit the bake button, because by doing it this way, you can choose what layer it will bake onto. So I'm just going to stick with the default layer, click OK, and then you'll see in the background my little component, my little sphere is actually there. I'm going to go into my shaded mode, and you'll see there is actually a sphere now baked into my Rhino document, right? So that's how we actually bring stuff from Grasshopper into Rhino. So once we're done, we want to bake this thing. If you just do it by hitting the middle mouse button, it just bakes it onto whatever your current active layer is on, right? So just keep that in mind when you bake things. And finally, there's a couple other things. These two are very important. If you hit the canvas, and in fact, it also works if you select the component and just middle mouse button, you still access that component's, you're still accessing that particular component. The other two that are really important is the disable solver button. This is really important because sometimes in Grasshopper, like if we go back to my point here, so my point is controlling the location of this sphere, right? If I move it in Rhino, it moves the sphere in Grasshopper with it, right? It's a live connection. Sometimes in Grasshopper, you don't want that to happen straight away. And you can do that by just hitting the middle mouse button and putting the lock on. You know that it's on because on the left-hand side, you have the little lock on your canvas. Now, this allows you to like make changes to things. You'll see the preview has gone, but it's not actually, my script is not running. So I can go and change something, And when I'm ready, I can run the script again by simply unlocking the canvas, and the script will run again. The play button does one more thing in, let's say I'm going to put the lock on. You'll see the preview has gone because Grasshopper is kind of asleep at this point. It's not doing anything. I can really quickly run the script by quickly pressing the recompute button, and that really quickly runs the script in the background without it continuing to be live. So that's also a useful one if you want to refresh a script. So if you unlock your canvas, you can kind of go back into normal mode. A few other little things. The find is quite useful. This helps you search your canvas for a particular component. So if I type in move, it tells me where my move components are, and you can go and like find out the one that you are looking for. That is quite useful. The last one is navigate. This allows you to like quickly navigate your script. Now this may seem a bit stupid because our script is not very big at the moment, but you know, scripts can be massive. You'll also notice there is a little compass in the right hand corner. If you ever get lost in lost in the Grasshopper canvas, it basically points you back home to get back to that little corner. So they're kind of useful. You can also access settings. I won't go into that, but that's like again, you can access some of the things that we've gone through the Grasshopper settings. But those are the key ones that I wanted to talk to you guys about in terms of the overall Grasshopper interface. I think that covers everything that we're gonna show here. I'll also put this up on the screen so you can see what some of these components do. Clusters and groups I will cover tomorrow in our tips and tricks portion of the 102 class. So that brings us to our second chapter in today's course. So I will pause for a little second and see if there's any questions coming from the audience. Maybe Guillaume will come back on the screen and answer some of these questions. And Fiverr, if you have any that you want to post up.
I've tried to answer a few on the fly here. I think Joel is having a very specific issue that's a little bit hard to answer, I guess, just through text. So yeah, if you want to send us your actual script and geometry so that we can help, but I'm not sure we can do much from not seeing what you're actually working with.
Yeah, we'll swing back to specific questions like what, lofting and stuff. He's already jumping ahead, making things, but that's great. I think there is a question like someone asked, are you locking the entire script or just part of it? You're locking the canvas, so that's the entire thing. So when you put the lock on, basically Grasshopper is paused, it's turned off. You're no longer using it.
To add to that, when it's useful when, say, your script takes a few seconds or a few minutes to run, if it's really complex and you need to do a few adjustments, you don't want at any adjustment to have to wait 2 minutes and then do the second adjustment, wait 2 minutes again. You just lock it, do your changes, and then go back to life.
Yeah. Someone asked, how do we give the radius to the sphere? I will come back and just show you that one because it's that's a simple one. So, there should be some clues in this, right? It's asking us for a radius, right? And you can see there's a number already input into it. So this is a good example where, let's go and see our sphere. If we zoom in, if we right click on radius, I can set a number, so I can make it 5 meters and my sphere gets bigger. But what's more interesting is I can use a slider and just type in a word number slider. You'll see here it's just called number slider, or you can get it from here in the interface up here, the little arrow thing. And by plugging that in, I can make my sphere different sizes. And this is where the power of the parametric aspect of it. I can actually play around with different size sphere until I find my dream sphere, which we'll kind of look into in a little bit. What is the difference between generative design and parametric design? That's going back a little bit, but yeah, that comes back to you know, it's a bit of a tricky question. Generative design. Once you get into generative design, you're having a conversation with the computer, right? You are giving the computer. You're usually giving this thing called a solver, a series of things to explore. For example, here's a tower. Here's a bunch of parameters to make it bigger and wider and twist it or whatever. And it's going to fire through a whole bunch of different options and try and find the best one for you. And so that the best one might be like, I want to maximize the area of the building on my site, and it's going to play with the building until it's like find the closest area that you've given it to. So in that way, generative design is basically when you're having a conversation with your computer. Parametric design is a much more broad term in you're basically utilizing parameters to control an object or design. Parametric design also is somewhat of a style that was kind of coined, I believe, by Patrick Schumacher from Zaha, called parametricism, which is where it very much became a style and approach. So yeah, just think, parametric design is an overall term. Generative design is when we really start to um, have a conversation with our computer. How much computational power is required for large models in Grasshopper? Can your average computer handle it? I mean, yeah, I don't know exactly the computational power that's required. You do, most computers can handle basic scripts, absolutely. Of course, when you want to get to a more advanced level, you do want a computer that has a fairly good processing power. Obviously your graphics card and all that kind of stuff adds to it as well, because you're previewing geometry and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, your average computer should be able to handle basic scripts. It's not like you need a supercomputer to make a Grasshopper. Anything that we do today is not really stressing out your computer too much, I hope.
You just have to wait a little bit more if your computer is a bit more ancient, but I don't think you need a supercomputer or whatever until you get to like maybe doing simulations and stuff using Grasshopper, maybe daylight simulation. Then you need some strong power so that you don't wait like months before until your result is obtained. But yeah, otherwise I just use a laptop and it's just fine to me for most of the applications.
Is there a moment where you can bake the entire script at once, or do you basic step by step? Yeah, that's a good one. I don't think I very rarely had to bake, the entire script, because like for example here, I don't want to bake my point and my sphere, but I could. If I select all of this, I can right click on it and hit bake, and all of these things should bake, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, there you go. My point and my sphere is baked. So, and the other sphere is baked. So I can just select a ton of stuff and bake it all. But you very rarely, I think I very rarely would do that.
Yeah, baking all means that you bake all the intermediate step to get to your final result. So you may need a few for reference, maybe sometime if you have something very complex, and bake a few curves that helps you generate the surface, for example, so that you can get back to it. But yeah.
So there's another question I'll bring up. I think someone was just asking about how to find. I'm not able to find my point in Grasshopper. My point thing is still orange. So basically, maybe there was a part that I didn't make clear. If I put a point component onto my canvas, right, it's not creating a point. It's asking for me to reference a point. And what I did, which you maybe couldn't see in the background, is in Rhino, I actually used the command point, I type in the command point, press enter. I make the point manually in Grasshopper, as you can, sorry, in Rhino, as you can see here. And then in Grasshopper, I'm just bringing that point onto the canvas. So there's my point in Rhino, which I did by just typing in point in Rhino and creating it. And I know that it's not on the canvas because the component is orange, right? So if I right click on the component, I press set one point. If I wanted to do more than one point, I'd set multiple, set one point, and then it brings me to the Rhino canvas, the Rhino viewport. I select my point and click enter, or it's already done. And now my point is on my Grasshopper canvas. I can see that because my component has changed from orange to gray. And I can see my point is now represented by a little red cross. So maybe that was something that was missed.
And if you wanted to create a point in Grasshopper, then you need to inform its 3 coordinates, X, Y, and Z, because that's the information it needs. So if you search in your canvas and type X, Y, Z, you should be able to bring a component that's create point or something similar.
But yeah, if you do
construct points, yes.
Construct point, that will actually create a point from scratch based on an XYZ. So a point, for those of you who don't know, a point is just a representation of 3 things. As you can see in Rhino, you have, if I turn all of this off, I'm just going to turn it all off. You see your Rhino has representation, an X, a Y, and a third vector that you can't see, which is a V, right? The Z, the Z axis, which is the, straight up essentially, right? So a point, in order to find out the location of point, it's a dimension in the X, it's a dimension in the Y, and a dimension in the Z. That's why when you look at a point in Grasshopper, if we turn this back on, if I hover over it, or to create a point, you just give it 3 coordinates, an X, Y, Z coordinate. If all those coordinates are 0, like it is now, then it starts at the origin of Rhino space. Someone's asking, can you attach more than one component, like the slider, to the radius input of that sphere? Yeah, you can. Like if I do 3 that are different sizes, and I feel like I'll answer your question, but I don't want you guys to do this too much because it can be dangerous. If you hold down the shift button, you'll see there's now control minus is it, shift plus is it. So you can actually add multiple inputs into it. Now, what this is going to do is you'll see now I have 3 spheres. So each one of these is creating a new sphere. And the reason for that is because of the way lists work in Grasshopper. And so we're getting ahead of ourselves. I love the questions. We're getting ahead of ourselves.
You guys are too fast.
Yeah, you guys are learning too quickly. So yeah, you can input multiple things in, but be careful when you do it because you can mess up your script. But yeah.
And you have no visibility of the order of what's the first sphere, what's the second, what's the third. But we'll get to it once we get to the list. Yeah.
When it comes to 2D elevation drawings, are you going to export the elevation from Rhino and Grasshopper directly? I'm not 100% sure what you mean by that. When it comes to 2D elevation drawings, yeah. So if I wanted to create an elevation of this, I mean, I could bake it in Rhino and then just go to one of my, elevation views and, change the view to what I want, and things like that. So it's a little bit like in terms of 2D drawing, you can use Grasshopper to make 2D drawing, but you can also utilize Rhino to, set up your views and all that kind of stuff as you would do in Rhino. So, yeah, it's kind of it's a bit. Oh, see there. You have to be careful. I've deleted my my beautiful point there. So yeah, in terms of 2D elevations and stuff like that, you just bake the geometry into Rhino and use Rhino to create an elevation essentially. But if you wanted to, you can do drawings. What is the best method to improve over time in Grasshopper? That is a good question.
Watch
The
our videos.
yeah, subscribe to Architect Network. That's the best. No, the best way is to try and use it. You got to keep setting yourself little goals. There is a learning curve with Grasshopper, and I do get that. Like I recommend you try and use things on, um, on the projects that you work on. But there is a bit of a learning curve, right? And so, um, I think it's important to keep trying it. If you can't work in if you can't like work out the problem on a project, then maybe make a little task for yourself and challenge. So keep trying to use it and keep forcing yourself to use it. That's simply the best way to learn. Maybe we'll do a couple more questions. Isn't it better if we make point curves surface as originally in Grasshopper instead of assigning them from Rhino into Grasshopper? Yeah, that's also the case. I mean, yeah, we don't have to make the point in in Rhino. But it's always a mix because yes, this point it seems a bit dumb because it's just this thing I'm moving around. But sometimes, like you might have a curve in Rhino that's representing something quite, it's representing the edge of the Serpentine Pavilion, right? And I just want, as a designer, I just want that manual touch and control, right? And there may be something really specific, like this is the boundary of my site, and I kind of just want it to be perfect, right? So sometimes it's better to control things manually, because as a designer, you're a bit more have a bit more of that designer touch, in Rhino. And to get it exactly right in Grasshopper would just be a little bit more painful. So it's always a bit of a balance. Sometimes, yeah, if you can control things in Grasshopper, then great. If not, you can do it. Um,
Yeah,
what if you want?
it's definitely a case by case. I think, as you said, like if you had to manually set all the coordinates of all the points that generate your curve, that may be really painful, and that's how you would do it in Grasshopper. And there are cases where, for example, you have a site with a topography. You're not going to generate that to Grasshopper. It's kind of a a dead object that you need to work with, but you're not going to generate it. So in that case, you'd bring it in.
Yeah, exactly. Um, this next question, I'm not going to answer because we're going to answer it later. Uh, but as a clue, if you want to create three spheres to start from different points, then you input 3 points and 3 numbers. But that's a great question. I'm not going to answer it because I want to see if you can answer it after we've done the next few parts in our course. So thank you for your question, and we'll swing back to it. I think we'll keep it there because I'm amazed at how many questions there are. This is incredible. Uh, what's the story of Voronoi overdosing? Oh, maybe I can't. This is a good question. What's the story of? I never know how to pronounce it correctly. Voronoi
Voronoi. Yeah.
overdosing Grasshopper. It is a good question. I think when Grasshopper first came about, people love Voronoi. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's that kind of uh, let me see if I can get an example.
Imagine bubbles, like a soap bubble bath that you just. I mean, that's a
So
3D
this
Voronoi, but
is,
you cut it through. It's kind of like the
uh,
cells.
you
Yeah.
know, I think it's a great example of parametric design, right? It gave us the ability to do these things really easily. And so people just thought it was super cool. It's something really easy to do. It's super fun. So why not, bring it into your design? But I think it's kind of been overdone at this point. So yeah, no more Voronoi.
It's like, do you use Grasshopper to solve the design that's in your head, or do you have no idea what to do and you just open Grasshopper and do something with it? It's like different
Yeah,
approaches. We tend to do more the first one, but some people may want to, let Grasshopper drive a little bit their
yeah, yeah.
creativity.
There are a lot of questions, guys. I'll keep coming back to them. Even after the event, I'll try and answer some of these in Discord as well. Let's do one more. Is Rhino Grasshopper the right tool to design, mimic, represent natural objects, e.g., corals, trees, terrain, digital morphogenesis? Any references? Okay, so this is a yes and no. Like Grasshopper, you can be used to create biomimicry and create natural things. And we kind of just showed you that with the Voronoi thing. Voronoi is based off, things that happen in nature. So on one hand, yes, but also no, because sometimes it can be a little over intricate. Like terrain can be used. I'm just trying to think of like trees itself, the actual tree itself. Yes, you could use Grasshopper to make it. Would I use Grasshopper to make a tree? No. But would I use Grasshopper to populate hundreds of trees? Yes. So it's a little bit of mix. I can't think off the top of my head of something I would directly recommend for you guys.
So in terms of biomimicry, I would say there is like kind of the physics-based things, like if you want to do a tensile structure or things that are present in nature and that have very physics-based um, uh, logic behind it, then yes, and use Kangaroo for that, which is one of the plugins for Grasshopper. Then there are things like when you say trees, I also think there is a lot of algorithms and there is a lot of research into that on how to create um, these structures like with a logic and a few parameters behind. As soon as you have a logic, then yeah, you can bring it into Grasshopper. I think that's the key, is like as long as there is a structure and a logic in the creation of the shape, then essentially yes, you can do it in Grasshopper.
Yeah.
It may be more or less complicated, but
Yeah. That's great. I think we'll pause the questions there as we'll move into the next portion here. So yeah, Pfizer, if you're in the background, maybe you could remove this question so we could jump back on the rest of the course. But yeah, okay, I think this is great. There's so many interesting questions. We'll come back to as many of them as we can. So let's jump to the next part, which is going to be talking a little bit about developing logic, and we'll have some of our first challenges, our first challenge as we get into it. So get ready to follow along because we're going to be doing some actual challenge. I'll hide myself and Guillaume again, and we'll pop back up shortly.